baked alive by extreme temperatures while trapped inside of an industrial bread oven. These two hard-working men faced a horror few could ever imagine. What began as a simple maintenance job turned into a literal hell on earth. On May 16, 1998, at Harvestime Bakery in Leicester, United Kingdom, 47-year-old David Mays and 43-year-old engineer Ian Erickson were tasked with recovering a grid that had come off an industrial bread oven conveyor belt and had fallen to the bottom of the oven. These ovens needed regular maintenance to ensure safe and efficient operations. Dennis Masters, the chief engineer, decided it was best for the company to handle the problem independently rather than call the oven manufacturers to remove the fallen grid. Even though Mays and Erickson had never performed this type of maintenance before, Masters believed it to be straightforward. The bakery made bread in bulk for its customers, and Leicester was its primary factory in the area. So, the problem needed to be fixed quickly. The factory had 3 industrial-grade ovens, which operated on a long conveyor belt system and baked the bread at 260 degrees Celsius or 500 degrees Fahrenheit. The oven resembled a long metal tube with many moving parts. Workers placed the bread dough in tins on a grid that moved on a conveyor platform that was 20 meters long and 3.3 meters wide. The conveyor system nearly occupies the entire width of the ovens, making it more difficult for the workers to enter them for maintenance. It also took 17 minutes for the bread to move from the beginning of the conveyor to the end to ensure even baking. When the grid fell off the conveyor in bread oven B, Masters decided Mays and Erickson would remove it as it was a safety hazard. However, what seemed like a simple maintenance task would soon turn into a living hell. Dennis Masters felt confident that Ian Erickson, who had over 20 years of experience as a maintenance engineer working with bread ovens, could handle the task. Still, the chief engineer thought Erickson could use some help and tasked David Mays, a general handyman working on the factory's boiler, with assisting him. With that, the plan was to switch off bread oven B just before closing time to give the oven about 8 hours to cool so that Mays and Erickson could go inside the following day. Masters knew that the ovens needed 8 to 10 hours to cool before they were safe enough to go inside, as was required by industry standards. The plan itself would have worked had the oven been shut down as intended, but it wasn't. The next morning, a factory worker realized that bread oven B was still on and shut it down at 9 a.m. The oven, typically running at a scorching 500 degrees Fahrenheit, had only been switched off for 2 hours when Mays and Erickson came in at 11 a.m. It's unclear why the oven was left on, but it likely happened so Harvestime could continue using it to bake bread. Factory workers had removed the grids from the conveyor, leaving a gap for Mays and Erickson to enter the scalding hot oven. The factory leadership knew that bread oven B wasn't offline long enough, so they instructed workers to set up large fans to blow cold air into the oven to speed up the cooling process. To make matters worse, Mays and Erickson had to work on a moving conveyor, paying special attention to it and moving constantly to avoid being trapped or crushed. By now, the job was more than unsafe. It was extremely dangerous. Yet, Mays and Erickson were told to go inside the oven with only walkie-talkies and thin all-in-one suits. They received no specialized heat-resistant gear, backup team, or comprehensive safety briefing. They were just 2 men about to face temperatures that no human body was equipped to withstand. Prepped and ready, the men entered the oven, but no one bothered to check the temperature gauge before Mays and Erickson went inside. While the front of the oven may have been cool, the middle was still a blistering 212 degrees Fahrenheit, or the boiling point of water. Within minutes, the unthinkable happened. Ian Erickson screamed into the walkie-talkie that it was too hot and that they needed to get out, but the horror was just beginning. There was no system in place to reverse the belt's direction, no emergency stop button, no way out. Mays and Erickson's panic and desperation grew as they realized they were trapped and couldn't go back out the way they came without being crushed. The heat seared their skin, their lungs struggling for air in the oppressive atmosphere, and all the while, outside the oven, Their colleagues could not help them out of their plight. For 17 minutes, Mays and Erickson were forced to ride in a fiery prison, where the only path out led them through more boiling and suffocating heat. 10 minutes after the men entered the oven, Erickson's panicked voice could be heard on the walkie-talkie again, screaming and begging for someone to get them out. Moments later, the men passed out. However, this may not have been the worst part. Since the conveyor belt only moves one way, it forced the men to go to the other end of the oven. But the clearance gap on the returning conveyor was only 8 inches, meaning Erickson and Mays wouldn't have been able to get out anyway. By the time anyone realized the true nature of Erickson and Mays' situation, it was too late. After 20 minutes had passed, Ian Erickson had made it to the end of the conveyor, but his body wouldn't fit through the gap. Other factory workers had to use a crowbar to widen the space enough for them to remove him from the oven. Erickson's body had severe bruising, burns, and extensive skin loss from the heat exposure. Workers tried to bring him back with CPR, but he was gone. Mays, on the other hand, had gotten caught in the bread's oven machinery. It took a crew of firefighters to retrieve his body, but by then, the poor man had burns on 80% of his body. 2 lives were needlessly cut short in less time than it takes to bake a batch of bread. 2 families were shattered that day because of a series of catastrophic failures in workplace safety. Because Masters wanted to save the company £2,500 in manufacturer fees, he bet the lives of 2 good men and lost. However, what was about to be revealed was far worse than anyone could have imagined. An investigation was launched in the aftermath of this tragedy, where the stark reality of corporate negligence came to light. An autopsy of Ian Erickson later revealed that he succumbed to circulatory collapse and heat exposure. David Mays died from injuries caused by the machinery, burns, and heat exposure. Fresha Bakeries Limited, the company responsible for the Harvestime Bakery, found itself in the crosshairs of a legal battle that would expose its shocking disregard for worker safety. In similar cases, prosecutors have trouble proving a direct link between the company directors and senior management. In this case, the Health and Safety Board noted that the accident was entirely preventable. Therefore, they brought charges against all those responsible for Erickson and Mays' death. The investigation revealed a litany of failures. No detailed planning for the maintenance task. No risk assessment was conducted. There was no reference to relevant industry guidance. Lack of proper training and supervision for workers. Company directors John Birdson, the chief executive, Brian Jones, the production manager, and Dennis Masters pleaded guilty to several health and safety charges. These men were sentenced in the Leicester Crown Court on July 17, 2001, but none received jail time. The court fined John Birdson £20,000. Brian Jones and Dennis Master were charged £3,000. The court's verdict was damning and fined Fresha Bakeries a total of £350,000. The company appealed, arguing that the fine was excessive. They pointed to their early guilty plea, the recent health and safety improvements, and even suggested that the court reduce the penalties due to the impact on the company's finances. The court's response was absolute. The penalties were justified. The loss of 2 lives, the lack of planning, the absence of risk assessment, and the disregard for industry guidance all justified the penalty. The court also clarified that there was no reason to reduce a fine purely because of its impact on corporate finances.